Mhm.
Hi, Hans.
Mhm.
Now,
Hello.
now I would like to speak about your piece, Land, about your multimedia piece. Can you give some short history of the piece? How this piece started, who commissioned, and
Mhm. Well, the piece is not a commission. It's second part of a trilogy I made together with video artist Daniel Kötter. The trilogy is called Stadt Fluss. After this game, it's called Stadt Fluss in German. It's probably in all different countries where you pick one letter from the alphabet and you have to write down as fast as you can different words with it. The idea for us was to have a music theater series where there are different forms of density living living together as same as on the stage. So Stadt was the most dense part where also a lot of different media came. The audience would walk around with headphones, so they were very isolated. Fluss again is a VR composition, so you have VR glasses on and you are transferred to the river Evros at the border of Europe, and you're totally alone. So that's again why we used headphones and these VR glasses. Totally alone, you know you are in a room with, in this case, 20 other people, and there are some effects coming from the outside from the room, like some heat and wind and electronic sounds, but it's a solitary experience. And Land, as the second part, was the idea to have kind of a commune situation. So where there is a group of people, but it's a group of 20, 30, maybe 40 people, but they know each other. So it's like living on the countryside in small towns where you know each other. You have space, like really literally for everything you want to do. And that's also what we experienced on the countryside, to do what you want to do on your own part. And we always liked this. In German, Land means country in the state, but also the countries of the land you're actually on. And we always liked this kind of idea going beyond around this term, because it's really, you claim your own part of land and then it becomes yours, and that's where you have your rules, which of course is in Europe not very present because the rules are very specified here. Still, you have some freedom, which in a city is usually just within your own apartment. Yeah, so the piece was done at Künstlerhaus Mosanturm in combination, in this case, with Sophienseele in Berlin. So usually we look for cooperation partners for this project. So it's not commissioned, but the other way around. So we have ideas for a project, and then we go to these theater places and present our project, hope they want to play it, and then ask for money until we have the fundings, and then start working. For that piece, it was very clear to say, okay, so this freedom you have on your own land also means we have some kind of time. So things take time, as long as they might take. So the piece is 5 hours long, and as a listener, you come into the room. The room is totally empty. We took off all the seats, and it's grass on the ground, and you get a blanket, and you get a book. So in case you want to read, you don't have to. So the book is written. So it's kind of the libretto for this piece, to say it's written after the film. And then you can sit on the grass. There will be things to eat later on. There's water there to drink, but you can also bring some stuff inside from the bar. And you can spend time there. So everything was happening during these 5 hours is happening in its own time. So that was the basic idea. It's very heterophonic in that sense. This piece is aesthetic. I'm very interested in. I told you before. So there are 4 brass musicians in the room with you. Not all the time, in the room. For the beginning, it's usually 1 or 2, then later on 3, and then it takes very long until they all 4 play together. And they kind of play in the idea of for themselves. So they sit also on a blanket somewhere in the room. They sit on different positions. Sometimes they're just there and listen. And if they perform in a rather mezzo piano, sometimes forte, but really in that position where they play downwards towards the score. They don't play in the open towards the audience, or they're just in the middle. They're just there. And this is kind of the general aesthetic. So everything that is happening for its own purpose and not for someone else's. It's not representative for something. So there is a huge screen in the end where you can see an empty farmhouse that we occupied for over a week. We found it there, and we asked if we can use it for our purposes. And they said, yeah, sure, you can go there. And so we started repainting it, and we start to claim it as a commune. The musicians were also there, and they also sometimes played, sometimes cooked, sometimes helped with some monument of 200 flags that a stage designer developed for this grass. So to really say, so this whole part here is all also visually becomes ours. And the camera is spinning once an hour around itself, so it scans the whole area. And every time it passes by, let's say, the house, it changes a little. It changed a little bit. More and more people are coming. In the end, it's a huge party happening there. And the house gets painted yellow. More and more flags are coming up. And all these things, again, are happening for their own purpose. And they come together in this specific 5-hour composition. But you have some freedom to choose what's happening where. So there's the sound of the film 6 channel. So even the things you don't see because the camera is facing, let's say, the opposite of the farmhouse, you can still hear what's happening at the farmhouse on the speaker. So there's also this kind of field recording composition. So it's a bit like Luc Ferrari worked. So it's of course not field recording, but it's a lot of montage techniques that we used. And I did this not by the meaning of narration, but by the meaning of sound. So there's a brass moaner coming. It has a specific tone, and that corresponds to the trumpet. But you don't have to listen to it in that sense. You can. To me, it made sense, but it's on 2 different spots, and they can correspond and listen to it, but they don't have to. It's also the book you have. The book is also divided in 5 chapters, each for 1 hour. And when you read through the book, you can either read every hour 1 chapter. It's like takes 10 minutes to read one of the chapters, or you can read it in the beginning, or you can just skip through it. And there are correspondences. So the book, the text in the book are happening at the same place as the film you're seeing. And sometimes there are correspondences, like you hear an enormously loud jet flying over this scenario. And that's written also in the book. And every chapter or every hour is started with a fanfare of the musicians. And that's one of the exceptions in these 5 hours of everything's happening by itself, in order to mark it even more precise, this aesthetic of things happening for their own sake. There's this fanfare every hour of 3 musicians in the film playing this fanfare towards the camera, so really in your face. And the musicians which are on stage, they accompany them. So that's like, okay, so we mark this position, and that's also written in the book. So you can synchronize things, but you don't have to. You can read the book differently, but then of course we remember, okay, this what I'm reading about here is something I just saw in the film, or I'm reading about something where people with a huge old cannon will come on this grass and then fire the cannon 5 times. And if you read it, it sounds a bit silly, and of course it is very silly, because we found these guys during our stay in this country, and they have this cannon, and once a week they meet to drink and fire it. So we asked them to do it during our play. So if you read it, it might sound silly, but then you see it again, and so it's kind of these things, they all happen. And the interesting thing is, how often do these things happen, and how much does that develop a system? So the cannon comes once. There's this enormously loud jet coming once. There's a brass band very far away from the nearby village that passes by 3 times. And so these kind of repetitions, they all have a different clock, so to say. So the brass band passes by 3 times, but it's with a interval of 55 minutes. So every time it's a bit of a different position. And then we have these musicians on stage. They have a different rule when they come on stage and when they are in the film, and it's a different thing. The camera has 60 minutes, right? So it turns 60 minutes. These 5 hours I was talking about, which starts with a fanfare, are not actually our system of ours, but we took the system from the French Revolution, where they divided the day in 10 hours, which are 100 minutes of length. So it's a different division of the day, and compared to our clock is 74 minutes. So every time the fanfare is standing in front of the camera, it's at a different spot of the camera turn. So we have a lot of circles that all go in different speed and dynamics, and you as an observer, and that's important, you have your own time when you read your book, where you sit, if you want to sleep, if you want to pay attention or not, and all that hopefully creates this this situation of observing music, image, smell, food, whatever, time actually, in a very specific and very autonomous way, I would say.
And as I understand, right, the main message of the piece is about let's say bigger or higher degree of freedom in countryside comparing to urban environment. Or
I would say it's ambivalent. It's not freedom. It's not one directional freedom. I think that there are a lot of restraints you have only on the countryside. There are a lot of things that are very, I mean, especially if you work there as a farmer and you know, okay, so my hay is outside, but it's raining tonight, then there is no freedom at all. Then you have to either be ready, and you maybe even need some help from the neighbors to be able to get everything, because if it gets wet, you can throw it away.
Yes.
And also you have to really know, and that's something also we learned even during the week we stayed there. It was a bit longer than a week, but we were filming for a week. You can do whatever you want on your ground, but everybody knows you and everybody sees and hears everything. So what we did was heard, I don't know, miles away, and people came over to say, what are you doing here? If you live there, you really have to be careful to get along with everybody else. So it's not only freedom, it's a very different form of acceptance of the existence of the others that can be very little. So we had some critical moments where we had people involved in the project that said, okay, if she's coming too, I won't be coming.
Yeah. And
stuff like that, where you're like, oh, okay, can we solve this somehow? And usually we could solve it with schnapps. That was actually the fastest way to get along with people. So these things have to be taken into account. So I would say the city is much more anonymous.
Yes.
What you do, but it's more restricted in the, so it's more counted. It's getaktet time, and the time on the countryside is much more defined by sunset. But so it makes a huge difference on the countryside if the sun is down. So then it's really dark. I mean, in the city, yes, it's dark, but we still have so many lights. It's never really dark.
And in your words, what is a central message for the piece?
For me, the central message of the piece is to perceive media in in music theater in a non-hierarchical way.
Okay.
So the idea of the piece is always, of course, it refers to something outside the country.
Yes.
But it has always a lot to do with music theater itself. So it has to do with this, with the idea of perception,
Yes.
of time, and of relation of media and hierarchy of media.
Yes, got it. And how's this idea you created some kind of let's say what kind of experience, sensorial experience, you would like to create for me as a listener or as participant of the piece?
So my idea from the beginning was to have this moment where you switch into a different perception of time, and that only happens in very long pieces. So the first hour usually is kind of, you're still in the stress, and you have some exception that things are happening that grasp you, and after a while or very quick you understand, okay, that's not going to happen. Things are happening rather slow here. So that's why we, for example, had the book. So if you become nervous, you can start reading, and then immediately you take down the book and say, oh, everything changed, the light has changed and the video is different. If you pay attention to the video, it changes slowly. Also, the music has this idea of a very long, everlasting kind of melody that you can listen to, or you can just have it in the background. And you come to, or I want you to come into a state of perception where you just relate things within this whole event to each other.
Yes.
Not so much to the outside anymore. So it's really this perception. Now I have one brass instrument playing, let's say it's a horn, and I hear a grass mower, and I see someone pulling a hole into the ground so to set up a flag. And they're happening at the same time, while I smell some cooking will be done. And then later on, there may be, again, the grass mower, but I smell something different. And then I hear two trumpets playing. So there's a new combination. And the combination doesn't mean anything, but it changes my perception all the time. So, and it's always the combination of these different clocks, so to say. And I really like this state where you just say, okay, so you start to live in this world, for example, and that starts in the third hour and the fourth hour when you say, oh, again, there's this brass band. So they become friends in a way because you had them before, and then you have these single elements, like I said, so the cannon or the air and the plane, etc. And it's very important that you have these things just once, so you remember, wow, that was a long time ago. There was this loud plane coming in this piece, and it becomes also in the room. In the film, it becomes night, so it starts at 6 p.m. the same as the theater piece starts, and it ends at 11, so it's dark in the end. Yes. And also in the room, it becomes very dark. So the light is following the natural light from the film shot. And also that's important. So it's really, as a listener, you get into an experience of a totally free time zone where things are just dependent to each other.
Mm-hmm. I got it. This interaction, let's say, interdependence of time and events, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's really this. So because everything is not structured by narration, but it's more like it's a structure for itself. It's just a system. So it's a system of different clocks and different regulations and different rules. It's the fun or the beauty of these different things synchronized.
Yes.
So it's a rather mathematical pleasure or musical pleasure, actually.
It's got it. So it's, and you use, right, as I understand, there is some film or video then there is some live musicians, then there is a book, right? The free media, and then the fourth is food and the smells, right? Which are on stage, right?
Yes, and we have the well, I would the 6 loudspeakers. I mean, they are dependent to the film, but most of the sound is fake. So the film and the loudspeakers are actually quite independent. So what we did on the loudspeakers was really, was a sound collage we did afterwards in weeks. So it's really, and then we have the musicians in the film. It's not a different media, but it's kind of important that we have both. So we have the possibility up to 8 musicians. We have action and response between film and reality, so it works with these media. But yeah, so that's within the media. But yeah, basically, it's these things, and it's I think it's very important to say, okay, it's also the space, so the stage you're in. So it's really, because all the time, of course, when you look down, you sit on real grass and you smell it, and in the film, it's kind of an extension of the grass. But of course, you always see the border and you see the black usual ground of the theater behind you. If you look up, of course, you always see the lamps. So you never forget you are in the theater, but you want to forget. So it's really this illusionary room that always shows I'm an illusion.
Good.
So it's always open. So you always see the lights.
Yes.
You always see the theater.
Yes, and each media goes its own, it's a cycle, right? As I understand.
Yes, it all goes its own cycle. And then, of course, it always collapses, these cycles.
Mm-hmm. And it was in collaboration with a filmmaker, right?
Yes, a filmmaker and a stage designer and a writer.
So 4 people, right? 4 people plus musicians, 8, right? As I understand.
Yeah, well, the whole team was much bigger. Of course, there was production management. There were 2 assistants. There were the 4 musicians, and there was a light designer, of course, because he simulated the whole natural light for 5 hours, and so the whole team. Not speaking about the 50 people in the film, or more, no, it's more in the film, but so the core team is maybe rather 15 to 20 people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And can you imagine the same pieces, but the same piece, but without only with sound? Would it be possible?
Yes, but not very interesting. Well, the thing is that, especially the sound, I mean, the music that the instruments are playing related to the sound of so let's say the field recording, the constructed field recording, that works for me very well for quite a long time. And I was listening to it for a while without looking. And it does work, but then it's kind of one-dimensional, because the interesting thing is, for me, especially here, to observe them playing.
Yes.
So it's very important that they sit there and they play for themselves. And then it becomes important that it's this kind of melody and that it's this quarter tone melody. But as a pure listening piece, well, I was thinking about a Hörspiel version of it that would be much shorter, not 5 hours. And then, of course, we would kind of have the text being read or spoken with it. That might be possible. We were thinking about it. We didn't have time so far to produce it. Mm-hmm. But no, it's really, I would say it's really not possible to reduce it to one of its media. That's kind of typical to the music theater, I would say, that Daniel and me are doing, because everything is so intertwined. And I am part of the film shooting, and we're all part of this composition. So, I mean, the camera movement is as composed as there is the time distances between the different fanfares, and that belongs together. So none of the media in itself is autonomous or does work on its own as a piece of art.
Yes. And tell me a little bit about all compositional process. How it
Yeah, so the composition process was really step by step. When we knew we wanted to do this 5-hour piece, we knew about the room we spoke about, like the grass and the film, and so we were location scouting, driving around in the middle of Germany, looking for a space where there's no cars and it's not so easy in Europe actually to find spaces like that. We managed, and then I was there, and it was clear to use brass instruments because I wanted to use instruments that function outside, that are also from they have the notion of this brass band, of course. So it was also clear for me, I don't need to use this kind of music because it's in the instrument already. So it was clear, okay, I need some different form of musical material. And in the being in the space actually where we were shooting, it was also very clear for me that noise, all different kind of very structured and very complex noises was all there. Mm-hmm. So it was clear this is part of the loudspeaker composition. And I was doing lots of field recordings from different wind sounds and different birds, insects, everything. And so and then it became very clear for me, okay, so what I need for the instruments is to kind of, in a way, visually, so kind of draw a line. So long held notes, pitches really, were something that were not in this field recording sounds. It was not included in that. That was all rather moving and like noise sounds that are unstable. And so it was long notes. That was clear for me, and it was clear for me to have this. I was experimenting with it, and I decided that it fit very well, not only to work with semitones, but really with quarter tones. First of all, because for a brass instrument, especially for a trumpet, you can very distinct go in these steps. It's very good. It's a very good instrument to work with these notes in a very clear way. For the horn, it was not so easy, but they both managed very well. Actually, it was a different one in the film than live. And for the trombone, I had Andrew Digby, so I didn't have to worry. And I like this kind of melody that gradually goes up and down in a much more finer tuning than semitones. And so that was clear for me. And then the question was, okay, so how do I deal with 5 hours of melody? I mean, it doesn't go anywhere. It's not a process. So what I did was, for the film shooting, I wrote solo pieces and duo pieces, rather short ones, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, and gave it to the musicians and asked them to practice them in a very specific way. So to play 4 bars, 6 bars, 8 bars maybe, not to practice just one interval, but really practice short parts and then repeat. And then repeat, and then maybe jump, and then maybe play a bigger part, and then repeat. So I got some kind of repetitive structure in that is already part of the film. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I use that. It's really that recording that is in the piece. Sometimes I just transcribe that repetitive structure and then use that for the live instrument. So I muted the recording of the film. And so this kind of form started with rather small melodic elements that became repetitive. And of course, that reminded a lot of me of the music of Feldman, or the way he wrote music. So there's one Feldman chord as a tribute in the end in this piece from his also 5-hour-long second string quartet, which is, actually the brass players, they asked me about this chord because it's not quarter tonal, it's semitonal, like Feldman is writing. So it kind of fell out of the aesthetics of the rest. So that's how I came to longer parts of this piece. And then there was the overall formal structure of these 5 hours that I needed to construct. And then it was rather clear to say, okay, I have different ways how they interact. So it starts with solo pieces, and then they overlap more and more, these solo pieces. And then there's the second hour, there's a stage where two musicians sit together on one blanket and play together. And then there's another one, and then I have two duos, and then they overlap in time. And then I have duos plus one person playing at the same time, but different pieces, just play at the same time. And then really in the fourth and fifth hour, it's all four together on one blanket, play together. And the more they play together, the less it's melodic, but the less it becomes chords. So there's the synchronization also between four instruments. They all play within their own time and in different tempi. Of course, listening to each other all the time. And play respectful, but yeah, it's like I said, it's heterophonic. And when they play together and sit on one blanket, they really play together. So they start together and they end together.
Yes, got it. And how your cooperation with your co-author, the filmmaker, how it influenced your compositional ideas, or
well, it's really a lot of, I mean, at Land, we already worked together for 10 years, so we knew each other very well. So at that time, we knew that there are these moments where you just rely on what the other one's doing. But in the beginning, it's really a lot of back and forth. So of course, being at that place together for the location scouting, we were discussing a lot and talking about what kind of music would fit in here, and is it brass instruments, would it be, it could also be electrified instruments, and we're like, no, that doesn't make sense, because then they need, you know, draw a power line over the grass to play here would be possible, but then very silly and very would draw much more attention. And then I talked with Daniel about this quarter tone melodic thing, and then again it was we asked Paul, one of the trumpet players. So I wrote down first thing, ask him to record it, and then to just put it to play it back at the same spot we were in to see if that works. So Daniel and I were back and forth all the time, and of course for the film shooting, the musicians were there already, and we were at that time. It was very clear. Okay, I take care of these musical elements, and because Daniel was also behind the camera, so he was doing that and organizing people to go at spaces. And then it was clear, okay, now everybody's doing his job. But later on, we discussed everything again, and the whole 6-channel sound that goes around was done by us together. So we were in the studio for 4 weeks, 2 times 2 weeks, sitting there with the film. And then, so we started with just the original sound of the film, and then replaced stuff, put stuff on top, developed ideas with the like with the plane, for example. There were no planes, so we just invented some, and we composed that really together.
Yes. So it's a lot of really huge collaboration, right? Through all the stages, I understand, right? So
absolutely, and also with the stage designer Elisa. She was not so much involved in all the sound works, but also from practicing and rehearsing. I mean, what she did, like with the grass, and also with these ideas of these flags set around, there was an idea developed, especially between Daniel and Elisa, with to build some kind of monument, some land art monument that also makes sense for the camera.
Yes.
And that, of course, was a huge impact. So she also had a lot to say in, for example, in this spacing of the musicians. So where are they sitting and where are they playing? That again plays a role for the musical ideas as well. So that's, of course, a lot of work, and it's much more work than when you decide on your own and you just hand it over to someone else and say, now it's your turn. But that's really how I like to work in these complex multimedia pieces of art. And that's why I say it wouldn't make any sense to separate one media.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of special technologies you have used or special softwares during the work process?
Well, what we were using is for some electronic sounds I used Max, but it's very little because most of it is pre-recorded either by us or by Soundmax, and then everything else was done in Logic, I think. Oh, and then we had to switch. Yeah, Logic was interesting because Logic is, is comes in handy for spatial movements for sounds, and combine it with film that work very well. But it's not able to play files longer than an hour uninterrupted. It always stopped. So we had to, and yeah, of course, I thought maybe it's my laptop's too old, etc. And I talked to them, and that's really not possible. So we switched to Reaper, which in the beginning I had to learn it a little bit, but it's actually quite a good program. And with that, we did everything like the specialization of the sounds is like the one thing is that it keeps turning according to the camera turn, of course, but especially there was long work of filtering and reverb and etc. It's like the distance of sounds, because what we could really do in this theater situation is work with a lot of distance from sounds from you barely hear what it is because it's really reverberated and filtered, etc. And it's only more like something very far behind is blurring is happening. So we use some or we constructed some kind of a party which you wouldn't see in the film, but you could imagine behind a hill that there may be a village. Mm-hmm. So we kind of created that, and then we squeezed with filtering and reverb and some echo, etc. Until you couldn't really hear what it is, but you could still hear this energy that there's something coming. And so that was actually quite good to be done in Reaper. And since then, actually, I basically worked with that.
Okay.
And film was basically as we didn't cut the film, so that was easy. The film was basically color grading. Well, that was a lot of work, but that was Daniel doing color grading and stuff, and that was, I don't know, Premiere, I think. But one thing that is we underestimated is really the length, 5-hour length, even in sound. Not every software is able playing that. Yes. Film, of course, it's huge.
Yes.
And this uninterrupted play, and that it's really important. So in the end, we have the film, it has a time code on, not the sound. And it's the second computer that plays only the sound. And it's the third one that plays the light. And they're all connected via time code, because the light needs to be very accurately, because if the cloud is coming very quick and shadowing the lamp now, but the sun in real, this movement also was doubled by the by all the lights in the theater, and that had to be very accurate as well. So there's three computers actually performing everything, and in the end, the piece looks like it's very little electronics. That was the idea, of course. I mean, you sit on the grass and you should not be supposed to think of electronic devices.
Yes.
And it was actually quite interesting. It was disturbing when people used their mobile phones in that performance, but people sometimes took a picture or texting even sometimes, and that was strange. In that situation, I mean, it's in the theater, usually you don't use your phones anyway, but as it is for 5 hours and people behave kind of privately, that was also very interesting, because it feels private. They started talking sometimes, and even that was fine. It didn't disturb.
Yes, it's very interesting. And I understand one learning, right, from technological point of view, is that very long pieces, it's very hard to play afterwards, right?
Yes.
And maybe there are some let's say, from all the project, right? Maybe you can give some free suggestions to other composers, or in particular young one who is engaging into all multimedia and music theater field, what would be your three biggest takeovers?
What would be, sorry, question again?
What would be your three suggestions? What you take from that project, what you learn from that project to other composers?
But you mean technology-wise, or in general, even from the way of work?
It could be like technological, but it could be general also, right? Something very important. What other composers would be?
Well, for me, actually, the most important lesson from that, but it's actually the same all the time with these big projects, is to find a team where you can really work with intensively. So it's always not easy to give up something to someone else, not to give up, but to give it away to someone, and to step back a little bit from one's own aesthetics, but it's really worth it. So it's really worth, in especially in these complex projects, complex because there's so many different opinions in there, to find aesthetic views where these different opinions are accepted. And that means to leave space for different media and to accept that it's not always from everything so overwhelmed. I think that's very important. For the technological things, it's, for me, they all come at a very late stage. Of course, I know they influence our work a lot, and depending on what kind of software I'm using, there will be different solutions. But therefore, I try to, for as long as possible, that's also for the recent project, the exhibition I'm doing here right now in Frankfurt, keep thinking what you really want to do, and then try to find out how this can be solved. Most things can be solved somehow. Even if you don't know at all in the beginning, there will be solutions. And that's really helpful to think that way, I think.
And how long it took from idea to final
to the premiere?
Yes.
2 years, maybe. I mean, in this piece, we had this chance, and that was helpful, actually, that it's part of a trilogy. So when we talked to the theater, especially to the Musanturm, where we have been working since 2013, and we told them we want to make 3 pieces, they said, okay, we do all 3. And so that was already very helpful, because we knew, okay, so we don't always start from the scratch. We knew these people already, they knew us, they already told us they would like to program that piece. But then still, I mean, a free house like the Musanturm doesn't have the capacity to pay the whole production. So you need to raise money for it. And that takes a long time. And therefore you have to write an expose. And then when you have all the money, the whole work starts. Usually what is written in the expose, I would actually need to look in how much we actually realized from what's in the expose. Usually when you start working, it changes totally the piece. So that's 2 years of work, maybe 1 year really artistically working, meeting people, rehearsing. What I really like and what we tried to do each time for these pieces is to, when you have the whole crew together, you have a tryout session, let's say for a week with everyone. And then you have about half a year to work with what you found. So you do some preparations for the tryout week. Of course, I do some compositions. And then you have half a year to actually finally write on everything.
Yes.
And then you have, again, ideally 2 weeks to really work with a piece.
Yes, and musicians somehow influence the content or not?
Well, in this piece, not so much. In other pieces, like Stadt, for example, because it's with very special instruments, so it's with Andrea Neumann with inside piano, it's Sebastian Berweg playing analog synthesizers, and Martin Lorenz playing self-made records on 3 different record players. There it was basically them defining the precise sound. So there I only wrote a structured score with no specific sound. So that's the piece only they can play. In this piece, it's a bit different, but like I told you before, when I asked them to play the piece in the film in a kind of repetitive way, it was them that gave some input into how the piece developed, of course. And if you have a 2-week rehearsal, not only do they get to know the score quite well, or much better than for a concert piece where they have usually 3 or 4 rehearsals, we can also change things. So if they say, oh, this is really complicated to play this part here, is it really worth to put that much energy in? If it's important, fine, and then it needs to be done. If it can be a different solution, then it can be that. Or after a while, when they understood the piece better, they started to make small changes. And yeah, it's totally. I think it's really important that it's. I mean, especially here, the idea was that it's kind of autonomy of every layer. So they have some kind of autonomy too.
Good. So thank you very much for second part.
You're very welcome.